We need a new system. We need a new society. We need to demand that which may have sounded impossible even a few weeks ago, but is not only realizable, but an imperative necessity. Socialism and the worldwide movement for workers' rights, in defense of the environment, for peace, for social justice, is growing. Welcome to the Socialist program. I'm your host, Brian Becker. Today we're talking with Peter Mertens. Peter is the Secretary General of the Workers Party of Belgium. I got that right?
Yes. That's
Peter, welcome.
Thank you, Brian.
Well, you're here in New York City. Great to have you here. You are here for the launch of your new book, Mutiny, an amazing book. I want to talk to you about it. We have to talk about some other things. What's going on in Europe? What's your view of the unipolar world versus the multipolar world? Is multipolarity the answer, or is something else the answer? We want to talk about your party. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, many of the communist parties, socialist parties, Marxist parties disappeared. The PTB, the Workers Party, is actually growing. We want to talk about why. Anyway, let's get started with your book, Mutiny. Why the title?
Mutiny is, there's a lot going on, and there's a lot, the world is changing rapidly. We're in a specific time frame in history, and I don't say it's gratuit. It's not. I don't say it for free. That the forces in the world are tilting and shifting towards China, and so Europe was in decline even since World War II, and now we see maybe the beginning of the decline also of the U.S. And you see China, India, big forces emerge, and that's tilting the world. And then there was the war in Ukraine, the proxy war between NATO forces and Russia in Ukraine, in Europe. And at one point in the United Nations there was a vote, and most of the countries of the global south, they refused to have the sanctions against Russia. And confronted with that situation was Fiona Hill. She used to be at the National Security Council in the US, and she said, "Whoa, that's a mutiny." And I thought, okay, that's a good concept.
She was your inspiration.
Yeah, thanks Fiona Hill, because I thought if that's the kind of mutiny, we have to embrace the mutiny that says no to the orders of Washington.
Well, people think of mutiny as an uprising, but they also think of it as an uprising on a ship.
Yeah.
Why a ship? Why a mutiny on a ship?
Ship, I'm a maritime guy. I live in the port city in Antwerp in Belgium. But in history, we see that all the ideas, the revolutionary ideas in the 17th century and 18th century, they were quite connected by ports and by ships. And the history of humankind is not the history of the land, it's also the history of the seas. And in these seas, among these seas, on ships, there were goods traded, there were enslaved people traded, but there was also ideas going around. So the World Wide Web from today was the World Wide Waters then. And like the Haitian Revolution inspired the French Revolution, and the other way around. So there was a connecting the dots between the global north and the global south, and the mutinies today happening all over the world can inspire each other and have to inspire each other today also. Since the beginning of early capitalism, it was like that, and it's still going on. And that's the force, I think, of the metaphor of mutiny.
It's interesting because in some ways, you, as a Marxist, you think, well, revolution or the mutiny of a class that topples the old existing order, that's based on the material reality that working class people face. They can't go on anymore. And perhaps there's a material change in the ruling classes. The ruling classes become paralyzed by crisis, of one type or another. So there's a material element of revolution that's perhaps dominant. That would be the Marxist thesis. But it's not simply the material reality. It is the idea, the consciousness, because the two go together. And revolution in many ways, as you're pointing out, I think, starts with an idea.
Yeah, there's a force when people, and certainly when the working class can get conscious the material force become a huge force to transform the society. And this sparkle, you have to bring the sparkle to the gunpowder to get this social explosion, to get this social change. And I think there is an anger, there is a rage among working class people everywhere. There's a kind of rage the last 30 years, and they don't feel seen anymore. They don't feel listened anymore. They don't feel represented anymore by anyone. And so this rage and fear among working class people is there. And so I think it's the task of socialist parties, Marxist parties, the global left, to be there and to orientate this anger, because this anger is real and this anger is understandable, and large part of the anger we can support, because being confronted with this huge oil prices, being confronted with this cost of living crisis, which at the end of the day is a big organized theft of the ruling class from the working class. It's logic. It's okay that people are angry and that there's the rage. It can go any direction. It can go in a Trumpist or Le Pen direction, but it can also go in a leftist orientation when there is a working class party, and when there's also a party that's on the floor, that's present in the people's quarters, and is also working on the soul, not only on the mind, but also on the soul of the people, gaining trust of the people. It's both. It's working. You have to win the minds of the people, enlighten people, but also win the souls of the people, I think.
And that's the other thing about a mutiny, a rebellion, a revolution. If you go through history, there's constant rebellions by the oppressed, by the have-nots, by the poor landless peasants or the industrial workers. I mean, rebellion after rebellion after rebellion, but only in a few instances has the rebellion succeeded. We talked about the revolution in France. That was a multi-class revolution, the bourgeois revolution, but the working class, the street, the enragés, the masses provided the people power for it. You had the Haitian Revolution, which was very unique because it was the only time where an enslaved people, not simply an oppressed people or an exploited people, but an enslaved people not only rose up, but they won. And that revolution starts in 1791 and ends with the victory over France in 1804. You need leadership. Without the leadership, these endless rebellions, even if they have leadership, they might fail, but without leadership, they will fail. I mean, I think that in many ways is the conclusion, at least, of contemporary Marxism.
Yeah, of course, and I think that's an important point. And so we have to be clear and honest about that. The orientation of all this uprising, all this mutiny, the orientation is also determined by a leadership. And then there is a question, which kind of leadership? Like people tend to wait for a savior. Like in the culture, you have the big persons, the big egos, the saviors. They're going to solve all the problems instead of yourself. That's not the kind of leadership we are waiting for. We have to have a leadership that's a class-based leadership, that's a collective leadership, that's a democratic leadership that can be contacted, that's in constant dialogue. And the leadership has to lead in a democratic way, and that means in a collective way. So there is no 1, 2, 3, 4 enlightened people that will enlighten all the rest. The process itself for emancipation, for class emancipation, for liberation, is a collective process. And so the leadership has to be able, in my opinion, to organize this collective force, this collective discussion, and this collective struggle. So there's not an enlightened leadership, there is a collective leadership that has to be democratic, that has to be a class leadership. And if you have that process, you can, there's a world to win. There's a lot of opportunities, because on the one hand, I think in Europe, like in Germany, France, there is a lot of first, there is a lot of mistrust. The situation is not clear. There's an unclarity for people. And I think when there is a party or a worker class movement or working class trade union that brings clarity in a democratic way, in a constant dialogue, you can go far and you can go fast if this condition of a good leadership is provided.
Yeah, so let's go back. Let's stay with this theme a little bit. Lots of anger, lots of discontentment, lots of disenchantment. I mean, there are so many manifestations of it. I mean, huge numbers of manifestations. There's this CEO of a U.S. healthcare who was assassinated here, not far from where we are in New York City. He was just gunned down by this assassin who escaped. In the United States, Peter, 1 out of every 2 personal bankruptcies is from people not being able to pay doctor's bills. 1 out of every 2. Huge numbers of people at the time that they're most vulnerable. They've had cancer or major surgery, but the insurance companies that they paid for aren't providing coverage and they go bankrupt. So this huge anger. So if you looked at social media, there was actually, I'm not saluting the assassin, I'm just saying objectively, there was this huge kind of jubilation almost by individuals on TikTok and social media. It was really amazing. And you can see all the CEOs and the executives of other companies are like, oh my goodness, this could spread. Because actually, even though this is an individual terrorist act, if there's no other leadership, if there's no party, if there's no movement where people feel like, let's get rid of the private health insurance companies, we don't have to live under this regime, but I don't see any other way, then individuals start to do things like this. Other people get disenchanted with the Biden-Harris administration. They say, what can I do? Well, the logical thing in the short term is vote for Donald Trump, who's even worse. So this question of leadership and organization isn't a secondary question. Go ahead.
No, in this, and I think the leadership is based on you have to be able to mobilize people, and you have to have a certain trust in people, in the capacities of ordinary people to mobilize. You have to be able to organize people, to bring together, and on a stable way organize people, not 1 day, not 2 days, but on a more long-term way organize people. And you have to work on the education of of people, Marxist education, to understand their struggles, to understand their everyday life, and also to understand history and the future, the possible future, and make people able to dream again on a society that could be possible, a society in which there is healthcare is a right for everyone. It's not a privilege, a right in a society in which education for everyone is a right, not a privilege, etc., etc. And if you have a leadership that can educate people, can organize people on a long-term way, and is capable to mobilize and inspire, these 3 things are very important for this orientation. Because at the end of the day, when there was the book launch, I had a question, and they asked me, Peter, realism, what is realism? And in my opinion, there is a class character of realism. Realism for these CEOs, for these big health private care companies, and for the shareholders. They say we have now 15% and tomorrow we want 20%. And the day after tomorrow we want 25% because we have to be bigger than the other healthcare private institution. And that's their realism. That's nothing to do with the realism of the working class. Because working class people, I start a book with the story of Kat, a nurse for the first time of her life. She's going on strike because she's not coping the end of the month. At the end of her salary, there's still a part of the month left. And then for the first time, she's going on strike because her realism is, I'm working full time and have not enough money to so the realism of the working class is not the realism of the ruling class. And I think leadership for a working class party, for a mass party that tries to emancipate working class, have to start with the realism of the working class. And the other realism of the shareholders, of the CEOs, that's not our problem. That's really not our problem. Our problem is how to solve the realism and the problems of the working class. And that's a starting point. And if we really start there, together with Kat, the nurse, and with all these kind of people, and then we do the education, we do the organization, we do the mobilization, we will have struggles. We will lose some struggles, we will win some struggles, but during this process that's the emancipation process in my view.
So class consciousness, in other words, for the workers, the working class, to have the understanding too of what you're saying, that our reality, the reality of the proletariat, the reality of working people, is such that it's not our problem to solve the corporate profits every
Why?
quarter. But we have a different reality and a different need, which is to have our children treated as patients rather than customers when they need to go to a doctor. And in America, you're a customer. You're not a patient. You're not a human. You're a customer. You're buying a commodity. So, let's just stay with this a little bit. Like, how do we build class consciousness? How does that happen? It doesn't happen, in a way there's an instinctive class consciousness. I mean, I worked in factories. If you're in a factory, if you're on an assembly line, you don't have to read Capital to know that the boss who just made the assembly line go faster is your enemy. You know that because now you're going like this instead of like this. It's very obvious. But that's kind of class sense doesn't mean that you've come to the conclusion, well, let's get rid of the bosses. Why should they own the factory? We're doing all the work. That sort of consciousness where the class thinks, well, we should be the master of society. We're making society run. We should run society. Like, that's a different process. That's another element of organization. It must have an organization in order to come to those kind of conclusions.
Absolutely, and I think that has to be done in a very dialectical way, meaning one point Lenin said, and I really agree on that point, that history is not a linear process going. There are silent times and there are turbulences, and there's periods of class peace and there's periods of class struggle. And in these fast periods of class struggles, in these chaotic periods of class struggles, the process of the learning curve and the learning process of the people and the working class is very fast. And at the same time, the learning curve and the learning process of the leadership is even faster. And I do think so. So I think that whenever you have mass movements, like, for example, the pro-Palestinian movement everywhere, a lot of these young people, young leaders, they are learning on a fast way. They're learning to organize. They're learning to speak. They're learning to theorize and to see what's happening, and to have a message to bigger people. But also the people on the streets are learning in the same way. And so that's an important thing. I think that when there is class struggle and when you have a party, a Marxist party, that is the moment to introduce some Marxist ideas and to explain the nature of capitalism and to explain the nature of imperialism and to open the horizon for another society controlled by workers, controlled by people, to regain the concept of peace, to regain the concept of democracy. You have to introduce all that thing, but not only in the teaching room, in the classroom, in the Marxist classroom, also during the process of the struggle that's happening, because what's been learned during these struggles, during the struggle for Palestine, for example, it will stay on the mass level, but also on the leadership level. So if we are able to wage struggles on different themes and in that same period introduce Marxist elements and Marxist theory to go forward to socialism, it will be, it's bringing in Marxist ideas is not a dark cellar to pour in some. No, it also happens during the process of waging struggles and organizing and mobilizing. It has to be, yes, on the same page happening.
Excellent point. Part of the Marxist view is that being, the way we live, determines our consciousness. If you're going to work every day, if you're trying to just survive every day, if you're not involved in political activity every day because you are trying to survive every day, your consciousness will be one way. But if you're drawn into the movement in solidarity with Palestine, and every day you're going to the demonstrations, and you see that the police are arresting you even though you're having a peaceful protest, and you think, well, why are the police are supposed to serve and protect and prevent crime. I'm here exercising my rights to stand up against a genocide, which we're watching on TV, and the police are beating me up. They're arresting me. Then you think, like, why are the police like this? Then you open the New York Times and you think, oh, the New York Times is demonizing us. We were the victims of the police. Why is the New York Times on the side of the police, which is on the side of Israel? and then you're a student and you set up a tent at Columbia University, and hundreds of NYPD police are called to smash you, and then you're expelled, then you think, like, why is the university like? So all of these things start to have clarity in struggle if there is also an organization that generalizes that. And I think this is something about Marxist theory that we on the Socialist program emphasize, is that Marxist theory is not somewhere up in the clouds. It's the generalization of the experiences of the class struggle. And by the class struggle, we don't simply mean the struggle of workers for higher wages. The struggle for Palestine is the class struggle.
Totally, yes. I think we have to see a broad spectrum of class struggles on different subjects. And of course, the working class struggle to have decent salaries and the wealth-producing class, because the working class, at the end of the day, is a wealth-producing class. All the wealth in the world is produced by the working class, and so this class producing the wealth and trying to have its space, its democratic space, its salaries, its rights, its pensions, etc. That's the basic class struggle, but it's not the only class struggle, because you have the anti-imperialistic struggle, you have the struggle for democratic rights, you have the anti-racist struggles, and you see in this system, which is a global capitalist and imperialistic struggle system, there are different kind of struggles, and they are important. All of these struggles are important, and I think another strong point of a socialist party or Marxist party is how to connect all these struggles and to aim these struggles at the end of the day in the same orientation, and to see that there is a collective power of the struggles, and that there's not every struggle in every direction possible. And I think in the period that will come, it will become more and more important, and that there are not only a struggle for pensions in France, that there is a struggle for them for Palestine in Belgium, but how we will have the experience of the different struggles, how we have contact among the leaderships of the different struggles, how can we learn from each other, and I think that will be strengthened. We are in this phase, like 20 years ago, I think the possibilities to speak on socialism, the possibilities to speak on another system, the possibilities to speak on the end of capitalism and imperialism, that's new. The last 20 years, the window of opportunity was not like that. You could do that, but no one listened. Now, people are eager to have an explanation of what's happening, and so I think this window of opportunity is there to strengthen all these struggles happening together.
Let's put this in some historical perspective. I agree with you, by the way. I was part of the project to form a socialist party, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, in the United States exactly 20 years ago. And we knew that socialism had been on decline. The world socialist movement, Marxist movement, had collapsed, in essence, after the Soviet Union collapsed. That didn't mean everything collapsed, but in general, the existing movement was gone. And the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, they were discrediting socialism with a new weapon. They could say, see, you tried, you socialists tried, you had state power, you built the second biggest economy, the second biggest military, the second biggest power in the world, and it collapsed overnight. And it wasn't because somebody invaded. You guys committed suicide. The Soviet Union went away. And so, and that's when Francis Fukuyama said, this is the end of history. Now, I'll just expand. I'll talk a little bit more on this. That means for everybody that that the U.S. ruling class said there was a history. There was a period where human beings lived together, basically in tribes or clans, small groups. That was the larger part of our existence as a human family. And then there was the period of slavery as the dominant mode of production. And then there was, at least for Europe, the feudal mode of production. And then there was the capitalist mode of production. So we can see over these couple thousand years that history changed, it evolved, it progressed. And then the Marxists had said, well, the next stage after capitalism, recognizing that human beings had gone through earlier stages, would be socialism. Now you had your shot, you socialists. You had it in the Soviet Union. You had it in East Germany, Poland, and it's all gone. That means we've come to the end of history, that history has found its crowning achievement. It need not progress any further because now the rule of billionaires has been tested and proved to be superior. So that's our fate as human beings. We can live under billionaires, the end of history. So that's how it felt in 2004 for most people. We started this party basically as an article of faith. We thought, this isn't going to last forever. There will be a class struggle. There is a class struggle. And as class struggle unfolds, if you want to get rid of the existing system, capitalism, what's the alternative? It is the socialist system. And that has proven itself to be true. There is now a revived interest of socialism in the United States, and I would say all over the world. I want you to talk about what it's like in Europe.
No, I do agree, Brian. Like if you see the feudal system in Europe, and when capitalism came along, it took 1, 2, 3 centuries. So capitalism didn't win one day with the French Revolution. It was an evolution, and they tried in Genova, they tried in Holland, the pre-capitalist. There are some conditions before the capitalist system was really dominant on all levels. And so logically, also in this history, there will be socialist projects that are trying to have a dominance of another worldview, a socialist worldview. That's logic. And the Soviet Union, we can learn a lot from the Soviet Union and the process of the Soviet Union. It's another topic, but they tried. At least they tried to end World War I with a program of peace and bread and land for everyone. They started with workers' rights. They started with rights for women overall in the Soviet. The first social security system in Europe was in the Soviet Union. The national health system from Great Britain was inspired by etc. There was also some things going really wrong in the Soviet Union, but they tried at least. And the Cubans, with the Cuban Revolution, they opened in the backyard of the United States a socialist project. And at the beginning it was not clear, and it became clearer and clearer. And they had the trust of everyone in Cuba, the peasants, the workers in Cuba, and they're trying. And now the United States is trying to to kill the socialist project with all these measures economically, etc. But they try, and they are inspired. They're an inspiring force. I think what the Chinese did after 1949, we can have a discussion now about China. We should have a discussion about China. But what is clear that is all these people saying that we had arrived at the end of the history in 1991 is the same people that are now in leadership of a system in decline on every level, on the ideological level, on the theoretical level, on the political level, and even on the technological and economic level. Because the reality is the US is in decline, Europe is since long time in decline, and the new advanced technologies are being produced in China. So the world is really shifting, and you can call China socialist or not. That's not the discussion. The discussion is the economic shift, the technological shift is happening there. And that's the new reality of our system. And the BRICS coming up, the countries of the global south saying we are trying to invent something other than the dollar-dominated financial system. That's a reality coming up. They didn't realize it. But all these people that declared the end of history in 1991, they are now in the camp that is declining. And so there's a new reality. And I think Marxism, socialism is also viewing the processes that are happening today. And the process is the shift, the big economic, technological shift towards China and that kind of countries.
You know, there was a wave of revolution after 1945, at the end of World War II. Yeah. China, Vietnam, Korea, India, Indonesia, Iraq, you name it, all over Africa. The anti-colonial struggle, the struggle for independence, for sovereignty, for freedom, in many cases it merged with socialism, in other cases it didn't, but it still had a very revolutionary anti-imperialist, anti-colonial character. That wave of revolution, let's say it went from 1945 to 1979. I'm going to give it 1979 because in the 70s you had the revolution in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. The revolution in Portugal also had the revolution in Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau. You had an Ethiopian revolution. You had the Afghan revolution in 1978. You had the Iranian revolution in 1979 and the Sandinista revolution in 1979. So this wave of revolutions, and everybody thought, well, U.S. imperialism is in decline. Socialism is winning on a global scale. It's got a lot of unevenness, but it's an empire in decline. And then Ronald Reagan came in, and the U.S. said, we're going to stop the communist winning streak. They said that literally, Al Haig, General Haig. And there was a remilitarization of the U.S. The U.S. military budget doubled. The replacement of missiles in Europe, intermediate range missiles that really were a major threat to the Soviet Union. Of course, it inaugurated a European nuclear freeze movement. But with the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was completely unexpected in 1980, 1979, the world changes. And instead of the U.S. looking like a declining empire, it is an empire that now projects itself as a unipolar power. Now, that era, as you're pointing out, is coming to an end, and the evidence of decline is everywhere. I think, and it's a long lead up, but I want to ask you this question. I believe that the United States is an empire that is determined not to be swept off the stage of history, and that the key to this success, this comeback, the rebound of the empire, will be to diminish or overthrow the government in China. That's what I think the real strategy is, using the playbook of what happened with the Soviet Union, using that same historical playbook. This is very much in the consciousness of the U.S. ruling class. So how do you topple the government in China? Well, it seems impossible, right? But there are different factions, there are different trends, different tendencies. There are pro-Western elements, as there was in the Soviet Union. They were more concealed in the Soviet Union, by the nature of things. I believe the U.S. is putting so much military pressure on China that they hope with the succession maybe after Xi Jinping, that there will be some factional division inside of China. And if you could overthrow the Communist Party of China, or if it dissolves itself as happened in the Soviet Union, that would be the new lease on life for the empire. So I believe that's what makes the struggle against China very toxic. It's a real struggle. I think for U.S. imperialism, it's an existential struggle. Anyway, these are my thoughts. I want to get your opinion.
No, I do agree that the long-term essential struggle for the 21st century to become is the struggle between U.S. and China. I do think what is different in the days of the Soviet Union, the difference is that you have at least the impression that the leadership of China and the Chinese regime, on a long-term perspective, was able, for the last 2, 3, 4 decades, to have a long-term development plan. Also a creative, their own way to develop that. And the material base of it all was the productive forces, the development of the productive forces in China itself. Because at one hand, in history, they became the manufacturing power of the world. And in this period of neoliberalism, there was a division of tasks. So the financial system was in the US, the productive system, the manufacturing, not very complicated things, they were produced in China and they were important, very cheap in the US, etc. There was a division of tasks. And then China was allowed in the World Trade Organization, and they thought, okay, we were going to kill China inside the World Trade Organization, but the Chinese were much more smarter than that, and they used all this period to have to develop their own productive forces. And if you now see today on all the strategic components of productive forces like artificial intelligence, like batteries, etc. All the strategic things, like the whole green economy, the potential green economy, all the strategic minerals that are being manufactured and treated in China. Four of fifth. So 80% of all the treatment of strategic minerals is by China. What I'm trying to say is the economic power, the productive force power of China is much, much bigger than it ever was, in my opinion, in the Soviet Union. And so the material base of China, this is not a political answer, but the material base, it is a power with two strong legs on earth. It's not a paper tiger socialism. It's a socialism with two strong legs on earth. And that, I think, is also the difference for the BRICS project. Okay, the BRICS, China is obviously the big force in the BRICS, but maybe the BRICS are not that political advanced. No, not maybe. It's reality. BRICS is pragmatic, etc.
Not ideological.
No, full of contradictions. And so there's nothing like the NAM and the non-aligned movement back in the days. No, on the political level, on anti-imperialism, it's not like that. But the big difference is the NAM was more political, but economically, the material base for the development for this anti-imperialist struggle was much more weakened than it is now. So in the 21st century, I think, as a Marxist, that the material base for the development of socialism is there in China, and they're developing. What the political struggle in China is, I don't know. I will not pronounce. I've not enough information to say so. But I do think it is an essential struggle of the United States, because they are in decline. They know it. They try to have protectionism. They try to have tariffs. But I think whatever they will do, Biden 2 or Trump 2 or I don't know, Obama 3, I don't care. Whatever they will do, they are losing because in China you have a power with a vision, also an economic vision on a long term. And yes, I think it's working. The last 2 decades are proving that there's a shift. And you have a tendency of declining powers, certainly in Europe, that there is a denial phase. There are people in power in Europe, they won't accept and at the meantime, there's a deindustrialization, because the big losing power in all this ball game today is Europe. Between the existential struggle between US and China, there is one big losing continent, and that is Europe. Europe is in decline, really in decline. There is a deindustrialization. There's a political crisis in Germany. There's a political crisis in France. The only economy, the third economy, Italy, is governed by Meloni, a right wing. There is no leadership. There is no vision, and there is the deindustrialization. And so there is the automotive crisis in Germany. There is a lack of innovation. They're way behind the US even, and of course way behind technologically speaking toward China. And then they did the most crazy thing I have ever seen. That is after the war in Ukraine, they shot themselves in the feet. The German bourgeois. I've never seen that. It was a crazy act of suicide. They said, okay, we block the gas, the Russian gas, the cheap Russian gas, which was the base of our export model. 30 years long, the export Weltmeister, so export world champion, Germany was fueled by cheap gas coming off Russia. And then Washington one day said, you have to cut off. And they did it. And now for the second year on a row, they are in depression. And it seems for the moment they have no answer to all these problems. So there is the existential struggle between the US in decline and China coming up. And Europe in this war is the losing partner.
Yeah, it's quite shocking about Germany when you think about it. I mean, importing inexpensive Russian gas, and then they say that's over, we're sanctioning Russia, and also the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines that were developed by the Soviet Union, but with Europe, are blowing up, and with not even a whimper, from the German or other ruling class. It's kind of like, okay, that's over. And then having to export or import liquefied natural gas that comes thousands and thousands of miles away from the United States, from the Gulf Coast of the United States. I mean, you would expect a ruling class to have more class consciousness, like this is bad for our class, bad for the German bourgeoisie. So let's try to explain it. Now, there's a theory and a pamphlet actually that's been written called Hyper-Imperialism. Vijay Prashad, our friend and comrade, was part of that. It's an interesting thesis. The basic thesis is that the European bourgeoisie, while it was very strong economically, historically, and still is, that its own decline has put it in a vassal state with the United States, and that it's not exercising independence because it's so intertwined with U.S. imperialism, either economically or politically. I mean, that's a theory. I want to get what you think, because it's quite noticeable that, at least with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Europe united around NATO and accepted the U.S. project. And the war is terrible for, first and foremost, for Ukraine, but also terrible for Europe.
Yeah. So yes and no would be my answer to that question, because I do think that the European project after World War II, so in the European level, we had three big continental wars, 1871 and the First World War and the Second World War, where at the one hand there was France and the other hand there was Germany. And so three big continental wars in the 19th and 20th
And in each of these wars, they were on opposite sides.
Yeah, opposite sides. And so the whole idea of the unification after World War II had two components. The anti-communist component, to have a Europe that was not socialist, and that was held by the Marshall Plans from the beginning, from the birth. There was an American component in the construction of the European Union. But there was also another component, and it was peace between Germany and France. And Germany had to have, Germany got the economy, and the Deutsche Mark, and France got the defense industry. And there was a living together somewhere in the construction of the European Union. And that there was...
and a new currency, the euro.
And the euro, to get a common market of to 350 or 60 million people. So that was a construction with a kind of formation or information of a European bourgeoisie, of the European round table of industrials. That existed with Gaullism, a kind of French imperialism, nationalist, chauvinist, European imperialism. It existed. The same French imperialists that are now kicked out in the Sahel. But it is not U.S. imperialism, it's French imperialism. And so that existed. So there was a kind of European bourgeoisie. But that axe fundamentally changed with the war in Ukraine. And what the U-turn of the Germans, who control the world's third biggest economy, still now, Germany, the U-turn of the German bourgeoisie after the invasion of Russia and Ukraine is incredible, because 75 years of so-called non-militarization after World War II. After World War II, they agreed, okay, 2 times militarizations and Germany together, we won't be a militarized country anymore. A short story. And so they changed it overnight. And the French were looking, what are you doing, Germany? They became totally pro-NATO. There were, of course, there were always NATO bases, there were always NATO dependents, but there was still a maneuvering room, in my opinion, with France, with the axis France and Germany. So Germany changed position totally to be in favor of Washington. Secondly,
in favor of?
Of Washington.
In favor of Washington. Okay.
Secondly, the European Union has changed. Very cleverly seen by Washington, because in the enlargement of the European Union, they get the Poland and they get the Baltic states. And Poland and the Baltic states are very anti-communist, very pro-war in Ukraine, but also very in favor of NATO. And so the historical axis, Paris-Berlin, France-Germany, is shifting towards an axis, Berlin, Warsaw, Baltic states. So there is a shift, and France is losing everything on that point. And the new European Commission, the defense and minister, etc., Lithuania and Estonia, so two of the key figures of the new European Commission come from the Baltic states, totally pro-NATO. So now NATO has now two key figures in the new European Commission. So, yeah, there is a shift towards more pro-NATO. Is it the end of the game? I don't think so. I don't know. The French are not happy. There are contradictions between the French and the Germans. What I do agree, there is no leadership, there is no project. The bourgeoisie in Europe is in crisis and does not seem to have a coherent project, even for the development of the bourgeoisie itself, even for the development of the reindustrialization of Europe. There is an impasse, there is totally crisis, but it's not the same as only being a colonial project. I think it's, in my opinion, too narrow as an analysis. There are very much aspects of that, but it's not the only thing happening, I think.
Okay, interesting. And for Americans who don't know European history, or American history for that matter, they won't really know that even though the Baltic states, like Estonia, Lithuania in particular, Latvia, but Lithuania and Poland, they seem like, oh, these are faraway countries, small countries, but historically in Europe, Lithuania was a major power along with Poland. If you have a reconfiguration in Europe where Germany is now in a new axis with Lithuania and Poland, you can see, if one knows any part of European history, the possibility of a major historical reconfiguration in Europe. I mean, it is a possibility.
It is happening. It is happening now, and there's a struggle between the French, and now the Germans are creating their own base, military base in the Baltic states under the NATO umbrella, and they work together. And so, for the first time, Germany now has a base outside, for the first time since Nazism, since fascism, the Germans have now their own military base in the Baltic states, but together with the US, with NATO soldiers. And at the same time, the French are creating a base in Romania, also in the east, with only Europeans. And so there is a struggle about, is it going to be totally NATO Europe, or will there be also a European defense force that is, of course, working with NATO, but a little bit independent from NATO? That's the French vision, and that struggle is going on. And it's utterly absurd, even in an imperialist view. There's contradictions between France on the military level and Germany about which weapons, which defense systems. They are not the same systems. They are other systems, and this struggle is going on. We see the Ukrainian war, but behind the scenes of the Ukrainian war, there is this struggle between France and Germany, US, on the other hand, going on. I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, let's just hypothesize a little bit. If the war in Ukraine doesn't end, and you have a sort of a Germany becoming a military power again, and the demilitarization of Germany, of course, was a big issue after the victory over fascism. But by 1955, the U.S. put West Germany, at what that time was West Germany, capitalist Germany, into NATO. So that began the project, and many of the NATO leaders were former Nazis. Historically, though, Germany had two wings within its ruling class. There was a wing that looked to the west and another wing that looked towards the east, towards Russia, for economic reasons, not for any other reason than their own sort of strategic sort of interests. And of course, Germany, being in the middle of Europe, didn't want to have a Western front and an Eastern front. There were problems. Is there a pro-Russian element within the German bourgeoisie? And if so, how does it show itself?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there is. There is historically. There was even in the 80s this current that was there, and it was not for a confrontational politics at that time. It was still the Soviet Union, of course, till 1809. But at that time, there was even contacts between the social democratic, so the bourgeois party, the main bourgeois party with the Christian Democrats in Germany, the SPD, the Social Democrats, had good contacts with some leaders of the Soviet Union, and it continued after '89. So after 91, when the Soviet Union disappeared, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, they continued to have these contacts. And like the project of the pipeline, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, was a result of all these contacts to import cheap Russian gas. And it was good for the German economy, and it was good for the Russian economy. So there was a win-win situation on an economic level between mainly the Social Democrats but also a part of the Christian Democrats in Germany and in Russia.
So meaning, just for our audience in the U.S., so the Christian Democrats would be like the Republican Party, or the old Republican Party before it became like the Trump Party. So even this conservative right-of-center party had relations with the Soviet Union for economic purposes.
Yes, they were not. I think they were, like you said, in favor of their own development as an industrialized, exporting nation, Germany, and they were, and it continued. And then there was a big defeat of this current after February 22, after the invasion in Ukraine, when Washington said you have to have sanctions. They were against it, like the big chief of BASF. BASF is one of the biggest chemical factories in the world, in fact. It came up during the war, it was IG Farben. And then after the war, IG Farben, by the way, they delivered the Zyklon B gas for the Auschwitz concentration camps, etc., etc.
They needed a new name.
Yeah, they were obliged to split, not only a new name, and so they split in 5 different parts. Bayer, BASF, Evonik, at that time Degussa, so they need to split. They still exist, these 5 entities, chemical entities. But that's big power, together with the steel and the ThyssenKrupp, who were also at the beginning of 2 world wars, the steel factories and the automotive factories, the 3 sources of industrial, they were against the sanctions. The big chief of BASF...
After the Russians invaded.
Yeah, he spoke out and he said, no, I'm against it. It will ruin the German industry. And he was right. He was right. But the political leadership said, no, there is geostrategic things that are more important than then. And so now the big question is, will this current of the bourgeoisie in Germany, what's the real power of this? For one thing, they said, we're not going to do the same with China. And whatever Washington asks of decoupling with China, we're not going to do the same thing.
Meaning the pro-Russian wing of the German bourgeoisie said we want to have economic relations with China.
They will continue to have economic relations. And like when the France, for example, concrete example, the French ask, on that subject is the other way around, the French ask that the European Union takes tariffs on the import of Chinese goods. The Germans, this wing of the Germans, are completely against. Why? Because they say if we do that, our automotive industry will be killed, because then the export of Volkswagen, of Porsche, Audi, BMW, Mercedes-Benz will be tariffed also in China. So they are really afraid for the countermeasures in China. And so they are saying, not 2 times. 1 time is enough. With Russia, it's almost killed us ourselves. We don't do it again. And on the Russian question, everyone now is talking that what's going to happen after the election? The end of February in Germany, there will be elections. The Christian Democrats will win. But in the polls, on the second place in the polls, there is AfD, the right-wing populist, and they are against the sanctions.
And they're a far-right party.
And
they represent this. Is this section of the bourgeoisie that's orienting towards the east, towards Russia and towards China?
Totally.
Are they working through AfD principally, or are they doing other things politically?
No, I think they still mainly working in the Christian Democratic and the Social Democratic Party, but they allow more and more space for the AfD. And the third party now in the polls is Bundesrat Wagenknecht, so the left-wing populist chauvinist party, but it's also against the sanctions, and meaning that there are only two parties left in Germany that are in favor of sanctions against Russia: the parts of the Christian Democrats and the Green Party, who is the most hawkish pro-NATO, pro-war party in Germany. The Greens, really, because even the Social Democrats at this point, Olaf Scholz, is against the delivery of the Taurus rockets towards Ukraine, which is a big issue now in Europe. So that the long range missiles would be delivered to Ukraine. And so you have the discussion now in Germany that what will happen after an agreement that will end the war. Will we have, again, economic relations with Russia? There is a part of the German bourgeoisie openly saying we have to reopen discussions and economic relations with Russia. Of course, all the pro-NATO forces are trying to say, no, we cannot do that. But that's happening. So on the one side, this is discussion on China, and this wing says we are not going to be fooled twice. We will continue with China. And secondly, what will happen after the war? I don't know, but it's the debate exists. What would be the outcome? I don't know.
Trump is coming in. What's your view? I know you don't have a crystal ball. I looked for it and I couldn't find it. And we don't have a crystal ball. We stopped making predictions a while ago. Too risky.
It's clever.
As the New York Yankees manager said, we don't make predictions, especially about the future. But with that said, what's your thought about the Ukraine war? Is it possibly going to come to an end? Will the Trump administration have a different orientation?
Yeah, that's a big question. I have the impression, what I heard and what I read, that like on a strategic level, because we were talking that the strategic enemy, and that's the words they use, is China. On the long term, the strategic enemy is China. And all these sanctions against Russia, the last 4 or 5 years, they made Russia, they pushed Russia in the arms of China. And so it weakens at the long term their strategy, because instead of isolating China, they're pushing Russia in the hands of. And so I think one part of the bourgeoisie says maybe it's a bad idea to push Russia in the hands of China. And maybe it's better to get peace on the Russian front and concentrate ourselves on the Chinese front. And so I think it could be possible that there is an end, some kind of agreement in the Ukraine war. It is possible, and I surely hope so, because if it continues, it's also a source of fascist forces, of nationalism, of racism. As long as the war in Ukraine continues, it is fueling fascist forces in Europe and I think everywhere. So I really want to have an end on this war. On the U.S. view, it's not to end all wars; it's to have a better capacity to. Is it possible? I don't know, but because in the meantime, the economy, the relations between Russia and China are becoming better and better. They're more economic, so it is intertwined. I don't know if they will succeed in Ukraine, because every war, also, like you said, has its own dynamic. I read a book about the start of the First World War One, sleepwalking towards the war. Right? There was the imperialist character, but there was also there's their own logic, and like what Biden did just before he left office to authorize Ukraine to use these long-term missiles. It's crazy. It's crazy. Like what's now in the UK is being said, we have to send ground troops. It can escalate, and it's with nuclear forces. So they're playing with fire. I don't know. I hope it will end. I hope it is the one and only positive aspect of the Bush administration is to end the war. But I'm not naive. In the head of this administration, it will be to wage a better war with China. But we have to use and to be able to use every contradiction inside the system. And at this day in Europe, the bourgeoisie is full of contradiction, and I think the Trump administration is full of contradictions. That's not one clause with one clear plan. There's a lot of contradictions. It's up to you to explain all this. What will happen? What will happen with the tariff plans and all this tariff talk of? Hey, if I understood well, it's up to you to explain to me. He was elected on the base to be a friend of the working class, Trump, and he was elected on the base to be the peace president. But what we are hearing and seeing of his cabinet, the cost of living crisis in the US will be higher and higher with these tariffs. So not friends of the working class at all. And the war among the hawkish people against China. So what will happen? But Brian, you have to explain to me and not the other way around.
Well, you can interview me on the next show.
Yeah, okay.
But you're right. I mean, Mike Waltz, the new National Security Advisor, made it clear that the U.S. has no difference. The new Trump administration has no difference from the policy of Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, who are the real architects of the Biden plan. Biden is really just, signing off on these things. So a very hawkish, very right-wing position. On the other hand, I do want to say that the priority for the Trump administration, you can see all of the cabinet positions are billionaires, literally billionaires. It's not like the normal managers of the national security state or the intelligence services or anything. These are billionaires, and they have their own agenda, and their own agenda is to sharply reduce taxes for themselves and also for parts of the middle class and parts of the working class, depriving the U.S. government of revenue, and then at the same time asserting that the tariffs on China and other countries will increase revenues coming to the United States to compensate for the loss of tax revenue. So the deal is that people will have more money in their pocket because there will be less taxes, and at the same time, they're going to be spending more for commodities because tariffs are a tax that will be passed on to the consumer. In the meantime, the billionaires, their real agenda, I don't think, is foreign policy. I don't think it's about Ukraine. I don't think it's really even about China. The billionaires want to loot the American national treasury, Social Security, Medicare, and the other economic programs. If they can, including public education, they want to privatize that. They want to make those basically trillions of dollars available to Wall Street brokers and financiers and equity firms. That's their goal.
Wow.
And that's what they mean by overcoming government regulation. That's what they mean by lessening taxes. So I don't think it's a priority for Trump, foreign policy. But he will do performative mass deportations of immigrant workers. And I think the war, the sort of drumbeat against China will intensify because that's not a Trump program. That's a consensus position within the U.S. ruling class. But having said that, some of the Wall Street pundits, they're not just Wall Street pundits, it's Wall Street Journal, is suggesting that Trump might try to break Russia and China apart based on coming to some kind of an accommodation with Russia on Ukraine and offering incentives to come to the West, towards the West. I think this is fanciful. I don't think this is real. I mean, the hubris and arrogance of American pundits and policymakers can't be overstated. So this is what they hope for. But I don't know. What do you think?
No, I don't see it either because, like I said, Russia is also part of BRICS. The relations, the economic relations between Russia and China is, or what it is. I don't know the figures of the trade relation between the two countries, but since the war, it went up. Of course, it was clear that the Chinese were not happy with the Russian war and the Russian invasion in Ukraine. They were not happy, but okay, the relation stayed. So I don't think so. That there will be an isolationist position towards China. I think it won't work. But on the other hand, maybe there will be some kind of agreement on Ukraine. I think it's not impossible. I don't know. But I think that it's not an impossibility that there will be some kind of agreement to stop at this point the war in Ukraine. I do think so. And what you said about U.S. is interesting, but you're saying that this billionaire class that really immediately has access to the government and is becoming the government themselves are the last robbers, the last thieves
Yeah.
to steal the lost public wealth in the U.S. That's what you're saying.
Yes, I think that's their absolute priority. So in a way, it will be a major shift in governance in the United States because people don't really know how the American government and the American economy, but the American government programs, which are very important to the economy, they don't know really how they work. But if they're able to, one, discredit these programs, which is what Musk and the other billionaires are doing now, they're taking the vulnerabilities and weaknesses of the system and highlighting them so people learn to hate the things that are really important to them, like Social Security. They want to privatize Social Security. This will mean instead of a regular check that you get at the end of every month if you're over 62 years old, instead of getting that, and a huge part of the population depends on it, your money will be basically based on whether the stock market did well or badly that week or well or badly that month. Those will be funds available to Wall Street broker firms, equity firms for investment purposes. And it takes away the reliability. And they can't, the older workers in America say, no, we defend Social Security, even the right-wing people. But now the effort is to discredit those programs and to say, look, you're going to do much better if you can have your money invested in a stock market that's soaring. You won't get your $1,000 a month. It'll be $1,800 a month. So this is what they're dangling. But the real goal is to restructure American governance, basically looting, as you said, major thievery. Anyway, I want to move I'm very happy to talk to you about geopolitics and geostrategic things. But let's talk about socialism and about the PTB. And I think for the U.S. audience and the English-speaking audience who are interested in socialism, and that's not a small group now, it's a growing group, they're looking, what works? We know other socialist organizations have failed. It's not unusual. People try things and they sometimes don't work. But we try to draw lessons from the past and to make the socialist movement and the socialist organization stronger. So I want to talk about PTB. You're in a country, first of all, you're in a country that doesn't have a single national language. So how do you overcome that? Talk about that. Again, people in the U.S. might not know how Belgium is.
So we're in the heart of Europe. We have only 11 million people. But we are a small country between Germany on the one hand and France on the other hand. And in fact, historically, Belgium was created as a buffer state between those big two forces in Europe. And in the north of the country, we speak Dutch, like in Holland. And in the south of the country, we speak French, like in France. And so we are the only nationwide party, and we are bilingual. So all of the leadership of the party, all of the parliamentaries for the mandataries from the party are bilingual. And it took us a lot of work. So it means that everything that we do is translated into Dutch or into French, but it's also an advantage. All the other parties in Belgium are separated. There is a French-speaking Social Democratic Party and a Dutch-speaking. There's a French-speaking Christian Democratic Party and a Dutch-speaking. There's a French-speaking National, etc., etc. And we are the only nationwide. And that's already in our. We have a slogan: "We are one. One. We are one. We are one in social security. We are one as a working class, and we are one as a party." And that's rather popular because most of the working class people in Belgium, they don't want this tiny country to be split. They don't want it. So that's our identity as a nationwide party in a small country.
And that's been true from the beginning?
Yeah, that's from...
When did the party start?
Yeah, the party is in fact a product of the May 68 revolts on the universities. It was a little bit before May 68, a little bit before Paris, but obviously in the same current, international current against the Vietnam War, etc., etc. inspired also by students, international students from Chile who were in the universities. There were some students who knew the Black Panthers, and all this came together on the universities in a progressive way, and there's a lot of discussion. And at the same time, there were a lot of wildcat strikes in the factories in Belgium, and so strikes that were not recognized by the trade unions, which is rather unusual because we have a big tradition of striking. So the coming together of the student movement, the anti-war movement, and these wildcat strikes give birth at the PTB in 1979. So after 10 years of construction.
So the party doesn't really start in 68.
No. 68 is the students, and then 73, 74, 75 are the wildcat strikes. And out of the fusion of the wildcat strikes and the student movement in 79 is being born the party.
Very interesting. And just, again, for younger people, 1968 was an amazing year because it was the Tet Offensive, where it was clear the U.S. was going to lose the war in Vietnam. There was the general strike in France
Yep.
in May 1968. Of course, in 1968, Martin Luther King was killed on April 4th in the United States. 120 cities burned down the next day. It was an insurrection by Black America. 2 months later, Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated when he was clearly going to become the Democratic nominee. Then you had the Democratic National Convention in August, and that turned into a police riot. Huge amount of radicalism. And in China, there was the great proletarian cultural revolution of young people, the Red Guard. So it was a rising of young people. But your party then has these young people, these radical students, combining with workers who are on strike, who are probably also young people, but they were proletarian young people. Is that right?
That is right. And the whole idea also inspired by serve the people, and the idea is coming from China, and to have the social enquêtes is in French, so listening to the people. And so, like, for example, there were medical students, and there was a discussion on the medical colleges. What are you going to do with your knowledge and your capacities as a future doctors, generalists? And then there was a discussion, are you going to be a generalist, a doctor for yourself, or to serve the people? And out of all this came a project that was called Medicine for the People. And so we still have them. So we have still 11 healthcare projects in people's quarters, and they're working 15 sometimes doctors and nurses, etc.
And they're party people?
And they're party people. And it was all born in the 68 serve the people idea. And at the same time, in connecting in the working class areas as medical care, etc., we had we became a doing party and not a talking party like a lot of other parties at that time in Europe at least were. So we did something for the people, and at the same time a lot of these young students, they stopped their studies and they actually went to work in the factories. Mm-hmm. And some of them succeeded to reconstruct a class-dominated trade union style in big factories like Caterpillar, for example, in the south of Belgium, the American factory. The one who was co-creating this kind of new dynamism in trade unionism was a former student, and there was a connection, a real connection between the students and these young workers and these wildcat strikes, and that gave a little bit birth in 79 to the Workers Party of Belgium. But being honest, at that time still, the leadership of the party was really mainly the young intellectuals. There were a lot of workers involved on other levels, but the leadership still remained. But this force, this May 68 force, this force to change the world, and this energy was not used for itself, not used for their egos, not used for no, it was used to have a connection with the working class, and I think that fact the fact that this generation succeeded in that is the main reason we're still existing. Because all the other parties, because at the same time the same thing was happening in Berlin, Paris, etc. But all the other groups, student groups, who remained essentially student groups and who remained essentially petit bourgeois, they all vanished. Or they even changed totally their legacy and they went to work even for NATO, etc. But the fact that the student group in Belgium was capable to transform itself and to get a connection with the working class, and so there was a proletarization of these young people and the connection between the realities of both and the habits of both. I think that's the base of our party.
When I first had any interaction with PTB, with your party, the Workers Party of Belgium, it was about 25 years ago, I think, and I was very impressed. You had a very impressive headquarters in Brussels and very dedicated staff. And the thing that struck me was the self-sacrificing nature of all the people. And this decision for self-sacrifice on the individual level was the consequence of a collective decision-making. A really, a lot of times, what happens in parties, I think, is a bad distinction happens between leaders and the so-called rank and file. The leaders become more privileged, they don't work as hard, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't find that at all with PTB. I felt the entire organization had this ethic of self-sacrifice and collectivity. Am I right?
Yeah, we don't use the word self-sacrifice, but I do agree with, because we are really convinced, and I'm really convinced that only in a collective way there can be all the wealth of ideas and experience. I really do think that if a leadership of a party or a trade union, of a youth organization, of a Palestine organization, if you don't really listen to what other leaders in the movement are experiencing, all the other, if you're capable, on being put positively, to connect all the positive elements of what's happening in struggle, in forms of struggle, wow, that there's a wealth present. And as a leader, the main character of your leadership, in my opinion, is to centralize and to be able to have all this well together and then have a discussion in which orientation. But the more you're being able to imply to have a democratic way and in your organization with all the middle cadres, with all the other leaders, the better your organization will work. It is like that. There is we fully are not agreeing with the idea of one enlightened figure that has been reading a lot and knows everything. It does not exist. No, the collective world of all these experiences has to become together, and it's hard. It's a hard day's work of all the leaders, and in the leaderships in a complex society as ours today, you have a division of tasks. The people that are in charge of the working class department of our parties. It's a main department. Wow, the capacities of these people, I'm totally a pupil towards them. What they are doing, wow, I'm learning each day. What they are doing in the youth movement, also in New York, is Onno van der Wallen, the co-president of Red Fox, the youth section. What they are doing now with this new generation of 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, they are organizing school strikes on Palestine, and their capacity to connect, to discuss with I'm a pupil, and other comrades I'm a pupil on that, and we have to put them together, and all these rich things, the wealth of all this capacity to mobilize, to organize, to educate people together, that has to be the central activity of the leadership, and not the ego of X or Y or Z, not the ego, but the collective work. And I will end with that, but a leader, in my opinion, has to be capable to educate immediately other leaders. And that's important in our party. A leader is not one that's only, his talk is not to educate him or herself. Of course, he's educating and re-educating him or herself, but in organize and in making other leaders. You cannot work alone. You'll never walk alone. You'll never work alone in a party and as a leader. That's very important. I do think so that, like what I understand from the Chinese party and other parties, also this collective model of leadership is very important. And I think there was a period certainly in Europe where this big time leadership, this exceptional concept of exceptional leaders. Let history. If you're dead, there can be spots on X, Y, Z. Doesn't matter at all. But when you're living, you have to be humble. You have to be a pupil. You have to be collective. That's our spirit. We're trying to do that.
You know, it's interesting. Fidel Castro, who you can't overstate as an individual the heroic nature of Fidel, and he's the inspiration of the revolution. He's, you know, like a heroic and historical figure. He never allowed any statues to be built for him, and in his will, when he died, he made it in his will that there can be no statues of Fidel, no worship of individuals. And people actually did worship him because of his role, because of his leadership. Without him, there would not have been a revolution, would it have been? And yet he had the same spirit.
No, and I do agree. Let's be clear. I do think that in a world as of today, there are exceptional people. There are exceptional trade union leaders that exist. A natural leadership exists, but they have to stay humble. They have to work collectively. They have to work but it exists. So I'm not saying all work is only collective. And of course, there are important people guiding and leading, but it's a dialectical relation between the leaders and the organization that has to stay like that. And I want to add, I do think, we do feel people they have a sense if you're honest or not. I cannot explain that. I have no words for that. But in our opinion, when we go canvassing, door by door, when we are present every day in people's quarters or on the factory floor, I cannot explain it, but people can sense there is a working class instinct on that level. If is yet another talking head before them, or honest people, and honest people can make mistakes. That's working class. Doesn't matter that people in that parties makes me. But you have to stay honest. You have to explain. You have to be there has to be an educational process. And so, being humble, being able to admit as a party, as a person, okay, that was a mistake. And so we're in constant learning process. And that's also, I think, people really do estimate the fact that the leadership is humble. And we have these principles also on a material level. In the parliament in Belgium, like I think everywhere, I'm in the federal parliament. I get a stupid amount of €8,000 a month, which is a crazy amount of money. And so we decided with all the people in the party that are elected, we live on €2,300, which is the average working class fee, and it's okay. And all the rest is for the party. And everyone in Belgium knows that we are not into the parliament to fill out our own pockets.
So let's just be clear for people. So you get a stipend as a parliamentarian of €8,000, and you keep for yourself in order to live that 2,300, which is the number about what an average worker in Belgium gets. And the rest
is to the party.
You give to the party.
Immediately. And everyone knows it. And the other parliamentaries are really, they're really, really angry because on us doing that. Because it's a mirror also for them all. Because we were saying it's possible. An average worker in Belgium gains 2,300. You can live with it, okay? You can have really 1, 2, 3, 4 beers. I'm okay with this 2,300 euro. It is okay, but it means that the working class also on a material level is agreeing with us, they are not like all the others. We don't agree with the PTB on that subject. We don't agree with the PTB on that subject. But they are not like the others because they have free healthcare. They are living on 2,300 euro. They are always in the people's quarters. Not only with the election campaign they are canvassing, but always they are there. That is being recognized. It's not meaning that all these people vote for us, but we are recognized as some kind of different kind of party than the traditional parties, and it's important. And then finally, also on the language we speak, I want maybe to say and add, in the parliament and also in the people that are the spokesmen and spokeswomen of the party, it's important they talk a language that is clear and not some kind of political jargon or even Marxist-Leninist jargon that's not comprehensible for everyone. It's very important, and if we talk about economy, if we talk about power, if we talk about politics, if we talk about everyday issues, that people can understand. Language is a force at itself. Words do matter, and so also in the parliament we have some comrades that are very agitational against the government, very, very agitational in the parliament. And it's important because the anger and the fear we spoken at the beginning of this program is being recognized by people. We don't act, and not all our parliamentarians act like all the others because they're looking all the same. Let's be honest. They have the same blue veston, they have the same blue tie, they have the same shoes, they have the same trousers. They all look the same. They are all male, all 40 years, all sons of lawyers, etc. They all look the same. They all talk the same. And so also on that level, we have another style, and that's important. And we have a radicalism. That's why they call us populists. We are not populists, but everyone in Belgium calls us populists because we have the other style, and we do that because their radicalism is being recognized by people. And the only other force that is doing that is extreme right. And so we're saying, okay, well, we're not going to leave all this anger, all this rage to the extreme right. We will translate also a part of that. So having a clear structure, having principles like this 2,300 euro, having a doing party like Medicine for the People, but also having people that are recognized, speaking out clearly in the parliament, all these factors are important in our daily struggle to win some sections again from working class, from fascists. And it's difficult, right? Because you said, okay, we are winning some footage, we're winning some terrain, but it's still a difficult struggle.
Yeah. Well, how many people do you have in Parliament?
In the federal parliament, we have 15.
And then in the EU?
In the EU, 2. Belgium not has. We had 1, and now we doubled to 2.
You know, the left parties are always small. The revolutionary, or the parties that seeking radical transformation, let's put it that way. They're always small until a certain set of circumstances arise that allows them to move into the leadership. If you look at the Russian Revolution in February, the February Revolution, you see Prince Lvov, you see this member of Duma and this member of the old Tsarist apparatus. You don't see Lenin. You don't see the Bolsheviks there. They come later. They come as the crisis unfolds, as the provisional government is unable to or unwilling to end the war. And if you look at all the different stages of revolutionary or radical transformation, that's almost always the process. At the beginning, it's kind of elite forces who are dominant because they're dominant in society. They're dominant in the media. They're dominant in religion. They're dominant in education. Later, the more radical forces have their moment. And this is another part of building a Marxist party because, from my point of view at least, a Marxist party only exists in order to achieve the final goal, which is to have a socialist reconstruction of society. I mean, we wrote a book called Socialist Reconstruction. It's not an elimination of everything in society. It's a reconstruction, a reorganization of society to meet the needs of people, to meet the needs of workers. But it's only under certain circumstances that those moments arise. Now, one of the contradictions is if you're in the parliament and you're sort of subject to all of the scrutiny of the public opinion, if you're demonized in the media, it's hard to sort of stay true to your principles. Where if you're a left party that's just on the margins, you're passing out your newspaper, you're not that relevant, you can be as radical as you want to be. So I want to talk to you about that, like that's kind of an inherent tension. And this isn't just about how to talk. It's not just about not sounding jargony or sounding too radical, which is really important. It's about how do you stay true to your political principles when you're in that situation. In America, we don't have a parliament. We're not allowed in. The socialists are kept out. The only socialists in the U.S. Congress have to run as Democrats. And as soon as they run as Democrats, well, let's put it this way. You are what you pretend to be. So they're pretending to be Democrats. They are Democrats. They are kind of liberal Democrats. But it's different in Europe. And so there's a tension with parliamentarism. Yep. Lenin talked about it. Others have talked about it. It's an inescapable pressure. How does the PTB manage that?
No, first in recognizing it, which is the first step and the most important step is recognizing it. Secondly, we took some measures, like the political line is not decided in the parliamentary fraction. Very important, very simple thing, but the party branches, so the party units, the base groups we call them, they elect delegates for the Congress. The Congress has a discussion, and there's a whole process every year, discussion about the orientation, electing leadership of the party, the National Council. That's a collective process for the line. Example, Russia invades Ukraine. Big pressure everywhere in Europe to only condemn Russia, I'm going to phrase it like that, and to say nothing about the building up of all this thing. The history, like
NATO, the provocations.
Like the main thing was, history started 20 February 22. Okay. At that time, the parliament, and that day, the parliamentary fraction has no speaking rights. We have first, we call a leadership meeting, and then we defined our line, and then we called in the parliamentary fraction, and they had to say what was collectively decided. Very important, because if it's the other way around, you're already losing. And so the day after, there was a plenary parliamentary session, and so we said, okay, we are against the territorial, etc. But, and then we said but, the word but, the context, and then NATO, and we were booed by whole the parliament, and it was big scandal, front page news the day after, because we dared to do same thing, 7th of October, same mechanism, 7th of October in Israel. History started at 7 October. Everyone that was even saying, but there is 75 years of colonialism, settler colonialism. We did it in Parliament, but we had an extra leaderships National Council about what we are really thinking. And so that was very important. When there are strategical things happening, not every small thing, strategic things that are happening, first there is a leadership meeting, an honest discussion without the press. And I'm going to stress that, without the press. Very important. Because otherwise, the press can be involved also in a decision-making process, and this guy said this, and this guy said that, and there's, at the end of the meeting, the press is... No, without the press, honest discussion about what is happening and what are we really thinking about what is happening. And then we have a discussion what and is said by whom at which moment, which is only a tactical question. And so the main pressure is always to have first a principle discussion inside the leadership of the party, and then the tactical discussion. And the pressure, the opportunistic pressure, is always the other way around. Always start with a tactical question. But if you start a problem with a tactical question, like what are we going to say to that media, and how we are going to react to that trade union, etc., you're already in the defensive. So we said, no. First of all, clear discussion among us, and that's okay. But there is, like the beginning, the point you started with your question: is there a tension? And the answer is yes. There is a tension between that, and so there cannot be the parliamentary fraction is not the same as the leadership of the party, and the leadership of the party is the main thing. And so the strategic decisions are taken there. But yeah, it's another way, like becoming a bigger party. If we say some things, there is amplification of our words.
You're
in the press.
you're being demonized at the quickly by
That-
all the media.
Yeah, and that's not a problem. Like we say, it's an educational process. Like now in October, we had the local elections and became the second party in Brussels, so the capital of Belgium and the capital also of the European Union and NATO. We are the second party, and also in Antwerp, we have 20%. There's the biggest industrial city in the north. We have 20%, and so they didn't expect us, and so we were demonized. In our history, it never happened like that, like Islamo-communism, etc. And at the same time, it's an educational thing. Luckily, some forces of the bourgeoisie called us all these labels and demonized us, and had front pages about the city council with a red flag and what is the program of the PTB when they take over Brussels, and etc. It was a big debate, but it was also at the same time an educational debate in the party and outside the party. So it goes two ways, because there was never so much discussion on communism than now. And that's not because we are everywhere saying communism, because we are waging campaigns about housing, we're waging campaigns about public transport on Palestine, etc. But the other side always repeating communism. And some sections now say, okay, if that's communism, I'm okay with communism.
That's funny. That's funny because, one of the, this is just anecdotal, but in 2010, when Obama said that he wasn't going to have Medicare for all, single-payer health plan, he's going to have what became known as Obamacare, which is turning over everybody to the private insurance companies, but everybody, in fact, could get medical coverage for the first time. So the right wing said, that's socialism. Obama's a communist. And all these young people started looking up socialism.
Googled socialism.
And Merriam-Webster dictionary was the most looked up word in 2011. And then the socialist movement started to grow. So these are the ironies of history, that the weird right-wing hysterical demonization of socialism actually, over things that are normal and things that make sense, common sense, like people should have health care. It, in fact, it rebounds to our advantage. As we're getting to the finish line here, I want to talk to you a little bit more about just the party and get your, however you want to present this. Your party, as many parties in the left, contracted or disappeared in Europe, or changed their name and changed their mission, meaning moved to the right. Your party has not contracted. You've gotten stronger. You've gotten bigger. You have more influence, as you've just said, significant. You're a factor in Belgian politics. Of course, that means you're going to be more attacked because you're a factor. If you're irrelevant, they don't care. Like, be as radical as you want to be. But you're a factor. Like, how do you account for your own development? Because obviously it's been very intentional. What you've done, how you've organized, how you've presented. This is a process of conscious intentionality. So, as we move towards the end, I want you to sort of describe or summarize that process.
Okay, first of all, we're constructing in the future, and that's also the book is about that. I think we're in a special phase of world history. There are a lot of special phases, but the fact that the tectonical plates of the world are shifting, there will be eruptions of rage and of transformation on different places. And so I think, an organization that wants to go towards socialism, towards another society, a right society, has to prepare itself for that kind of period. That's important. So the goal is socialism, and the period we are preparing ourselves for is a more turbulent period than the last 30 years. And that's important because you're preparing all what you're doing before a certain situation, and the situation won't be calm. The situation will be more chaotic and more turbulent that we know. And so that's the kind of party we are constructing. And so at one point we said, okay, we want to have a dedicated pro-socialist party with cadres who are capable to work towards socialism and who are at the same time capable to have a profound bonds with the working class in our party. That was the mission. And so we have I think, education and honest discussion among these communist cadres is a very important thing, and that's the holy grail of our party. That is the core of our party, and that changed. And on the other hand, we have also people who are working very hard, working with us, and that are members of our party and that pay 20 euros. So we have a two-layer system of membership. You can become member for 20 euro, and then you're part of the family of the PTB. You're a member of the PTB, and 99% of these members are very proud, and in the pub and on the football pitch after the football match.
So they're taking the party to wherever they are.
Yeah, and on their own manner and with their own level of conscience, and it can be, that's really, and we have 20,000 people like that, and then that's growing. And then we have 5,000 people that are engaged in the party. They're doing something in the party, and they're organized in base groups, mostly in people's quarters, but also in factory base groups, like in Audi, who's the plant that's closing down. We have a section of the party, a base group of the party. They come together once a month. They have a discussion on an actuality theme, closing down of Audi, European industrial situation, Palestine, whatever. Every month they come together. They're doing something. They're active, and they're paying a higher membership fee, so their level of engagement is bigger. And then there's an interaction between this organized group of 5,000 people and the 20,000 people that have a membership card. And there's a continuously interaction. Like in the Palestine campaign, it's not only the 5,000 organized members that are active, but also a lot of the 20,000 others, and even non-members are active. And so we're trying to construct different layered opposition. Our party is not one layer. Right? We have cadres, we have militants, we have base groups, and we have 20 euro members, and we have sympathizers. We have different layers, and it was important because I maybe will end with that. How to learn? What is the learning curve of people in our experience? Intellectuals can learn from theory, and learn a lot from books, and it's important. We're much in favor of theories. Theory is very important, but the learning curve of an intellectual is not the same as a learning curve of a worker. Most workers and common people, they learn by experience, by life, the university of the life, the university of the workplace, and mainly the university of the struggle. And so we organize people in the party and get a learning curve by doing things. And that means that common people organize themselves, even it's to prevent a bus stop to be abolished in a city town. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months of actions to prevent the abolishment of a bus stop. People learning during this process, because then like on what you described about Palestine, the movement, on a small scale, the local politician says, no, it has to vanish, but the politician that decides it, as a private chauffeur, never takes the same bus, and people say, how come that he can decide, etc., etc. And so the making able people to mobilize themselves, organize themselves, having experience in small struggles is very important, and that's why we have this multi-layer party to have places where people can experience the school of the struggle. And I think we're searching a way in the 21st century. We're trying this. Brian, it's also trial and error. We make a lot of mistakes. We are saying people that don't make mistakes, organizations that don't make mistakes, they don't work at all. Mm-hmm. The people who work, the organizations who work, they try, they make mistakes, they correct the mistakes, so what? And that's what we're doing in our level of. And the most important is, since we are doing that, there's a lot of working class people, a lot of trade unionists came not only member in the party, but are now cadres in the party, and also in the parliament. 1/3 of our parliamentary and local mandatories are working class people, are people from steel factory, automotive factories. Mm-hmm. And when Audi is closing down, like it is now, it is a big difference. It's not Peter who is talking in the parliament. It's Gabi and Robin from Volvo and Ford factory that was closed down. They come in the parliament. They talk in the parliament, and people of Audi, they recognize them. It's a worker. And the image also for the party, the spokesman, the spokeswomen on the party. There's no there are intellectuals. We need intellectuals. Socialism need intellectuals more than ever. But socialism and socialist process need also spokesmen and women from the working class. And so that's what we are trying to do, basically.
All right. We're going to leave it there. Peter, we'll put a link for your book, Mutiny, so that people can get copies of it. It's published by 1804 Books, our favorite publisher. And I just want to also, we'll put it in the script, but if you can tell people if they wanted to learn more about PTB, is there somewhere in social media world that they can go?
Yeah, this www.ptb.be, and then there's an English section of our website with our Congress material in English. Most of the things, the essential things from the last period are available in English. So please visit our website. On Instagram, it's PTB. I don't know in Instagram and TikTok what
Everybody will find that.
They will find it, yeah.
Peter, thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian.